You know, I heard a story once. It was about those other movie reviewers here on YouTube. And they were standing around a table. They looked at each other and said, it's not fair. He only keeps winning because he's not following the rules. And the head guy of YouTube, he looks around and says, well, what do you mean he's not following the rules? And they said, well, rule number one is a movie review has to be pretentious. It has to come from a filmmaker's perspective. And who cares what the average Joe thinks? And the head of YouTube says, you're right. Let's reset because no one's ever going to do that. And then I came at you with the Everyman Movie review and the movie this week, Midway. So I realize if you're watching this, that probably made zero sense to you because it was basically me reenacting a scene from the movie. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you hit, sometimes you don't. But just in case, I always love a World War II movie. I especially love when we can find a story that maybe is well known but hasn't been shown in film before. The Pacific is going to be ripe for those kind of movies. I mean, we've seen Pearl Harbor, probably most famously in the late 1990s Ben Affleck Pearl Harbor movie, which, as I remember, didn't go over too well. But we also saw it in Hacksaw Ridge, which was Mel Gibson's more recent offering, and I guess his mea culpa, his coming back from the dead in Hollywood. But other than that, I think the only thing I've ever seen made of the Pacific was either involving the atomic bomb program or The Pacific, the HBO miniseries. So I'm excited that they're finding stories and ways that they can get into the Pacific campaign and tell a little bit more about it. Because honestly, I love Saving Private Ryan. I loved, Dunkirk, which was actually earlier before the U.S. involvement in World War II. But nonetheless, I love all of those World War II movies. I even love ones that aren't specifically about World War II, like Overlord, if you check that out. I mean, it was set in that frame, but it certainly wasn't really about reality or about the war. But it's a time in history that I think everyone, especially history buffs, enjoys. It's something that's only half covered. It seems like Europe is the place where all of the interesting stories took place. But as a fan of history, I can tell you that is not true. The Pacific is chock full of all of the interesting stories you might want, all the ones you're looking for. But they're harder to tell. The fact is that when you're going to do a movie about the Pacific, it's not a bunch of guys running around in the muck. You can't go to Scotland and shoot for 6 months. This is going to be on a soundstage. It's going to be shot in front of a green screen. And it's only recently that, our ability to make computer-generated P-51s look real and do real aerial battle and make it look like it's believable. And Midway was a great jumping off point to what I hope is going to be a bunch of these movies. Now, I'm going to say specifically, I'm not doing a spoiler section on this. I think that Midway is probably the most historically accurate movie about a particular event that I have ever seen. I have done a lot of research about the Battle of Midway. For those of you who don't know, Midway was the turning point in the Pacific War. It literally made the difference between whether or not the Japanese invaded the Hawaiian Islands and then probably from there onto the West Coast, or could the U.S. military, specifically the Navy, turn them back and allow us to start island hopping back across the Pacific towards the Japanese home islands? For being such a turning point, for being such an important battle, it's given almost no credence. And it's amazing how many people didn't know anything about it. If you're worried about spoilers, go research U.S. history. You probably took a class in 10th grade, maybe 11th grade, depending on where you were. You probably had to take more later on in life. How do you not know about the Battle of Midway? You have to go out of your way. You have to specifically not do the reading in order to find it. So I'm not going to encourage that. No spoilers, no alerts. We're going right in, right now. So let's get through the pleasantries first. Midway was written by Wes Took, and it was directed by Roland Emmerich. A fantastic return. I haven't seen Roland Emmerich direct anything in a while. I know he produces a lot, but this was a fantastic movie. Visually stunning and everything that I would have expected from Roland Emmerich. Top bill on Midway is Ed Skrein, who you've seen before and I've seen before, but I was a little surprised to see that Dick Best, his character, was the focus of this movie. Now, I mean, there are a lot of focuses. It's him and his friends and how they're involved with each other, and then it's upper military brass, but the reality is they are in with Dick most of the time, and I'm going to get into it a little bit later, but I just think that maybe Ed Skrein wasn't the guy to choose. He's got the look of a guy from the 1940s, and I get that. If there is a weakest point in this movie, I think it was Dick Best, unfortunately. This movie also stars Patrick Wilson as Midway also stars Patrick Wilson as Edwin Layton, Woody Harrelson in an amazing role as Chester Nimitz. When I saw Woody come on screen, I knew it was Chester Nimitz. Before I really knew where we were in the story, he bears such a striking resemblance to him. It is uncanny. And if you don't know who Chester Nimitz is, guys, like, seriously, study some U.S. history. But nonetheless, the current class of nuclear aircraft carriers is called the Nimitz class. It's named after Chester Nimitz, the man who saved the Pacific War and the man who said aircraft carriers are the future. They may be named after presidents, but the class is the Nimitz class. And he could not have been represented any better than he was represented by Woody Harrelson in this role. Luke Evans joins the cast as Wade McCluskey, Mandy Moore as Dick's wife Anne, Luke Kleintank as Clarence Dickinson, and I'll say Luke also has that I'm a guy from the 40s look. You've seen Luke before if you've watched A Man in the High Castle, and if you haven't, why haven't you? It is an amazing piece of TV, especially if you watch seasons 1 and 2. I think it fell off a little bit at the end. I think they got a little lost from the source material, but just the same, I've watched it all the way through. I think it's amazing, and you should watch it too. But he's got that look of like, hey, I'm an American, maybe even a German, from the 1940s, and so he was perfect in this role. Dennis Quaid plays a big role as an admiral on a aircraft carrier. Aaron Eckhart joins us as James Doolittle, the head of the Doolittle raids. And of course, that is all just the American cast. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Nick Jonas also plays a character named Bruno here, who he does a fair job. I think he's perfectly fine in that role. I think people made a bigger deal about him being in this movie than they should have. The American cast was fantastic. They're joined by an equally fantastic cast on the Japanese side. We get to see both sides of the battle, both sides of the planning and the war, and the actors just did a fantastic job of putting us in the seriousness of the moment. I think it was amazing, and the cast should be applauded. Now again, I think the difficulty with doing a movie about the Pacific is it's really involving, hey, it's a 6-week battle where we take a very small island, or it's an aerial battle with aircraft carriers and battleships and cruisers, and it's really hard to tell that story, or it's been hard in the past to tell that story. But I think that we've come so far enough with computer-generated, maps and with ships and with planes that we really have hit the magic point now where we can start telling some of these stories. We can talk about Iwo Jima. We can have some characters on Iwo Jima. We don't have to show all 6 weeks of Iwo Jima. We just show that they were there. We show a little bit of the battle and how terrible it was, and then let's cut back out. But there are so many fantastic stories. So many stories from the air, on the sea, and on land, and they really should be told. And now that we can see that it's been done, and it can be done successfully, and it can make money, I feel like they really should. The plot of the movie, if you guys don't know anything about Midway, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. And the forces of the Empire of Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which was not a U.S. state at the time, but it was a U.S. military base. And they did so in an effort to try and destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet before they could get out of the naval yards there and challenge them at sea. As luck would have it, the aircraft carriers were out on maneuvers, and Admiral Yamamoto, who was the head of the naval forces of Japan, said that I fear that we have done nothing but awake a sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve. And, I love that quote. I'm getting chills now just thinking about, Yamamoto saying that. And the way that he said it in the movie as well was just the same reaction. I'm like, I've awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with terrible resolve. That's exactly what happened. And, I think to their credit, all of the actors who were there at Pearl Harbor, who were showing what happened and how they reacted, not that I was in anything close or similar at all, but that feeling of helplessness but wanting to do something and trying to figure out how to respond. For those of us who were at or near adulthood during 9/11, I think we had a lot of that same feeling. And, there's been a lot of comparisons made between those two, obviously, 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. I, for one, nearly volunteered for the military myself. I was 17 going into my senior year of high school, and I was prime age. I could have ended up in Afghanistan or Iraq had I made that decision. I didn't, and instead, here I am with you fine folks talking about a movie for guys who are apparently far braver than I. But from Pearl, we set out and we see just how inept the U.S. naval forces are. And I say inept, but problem was no one was really talking to anyone. Edwin Layton was the guy who missed the planning of the attack for Pearl Harbor. He was in charge of intelligence. He didn't see the attack coming. It came as a surprise. He saw that as a total failure. But when Nimitz came in as the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, he said, listen, you said something was amiss. Nobody listened to you. You moved on. You followed orders, and that's what you're supposed to do. All I want you to do is to push a little harder on me than you pushed on the last guy to make him listen to you. It's such a true, from my understanding, I think it's such a true representation of Chester Nimitz and the relationship that he had with Leighton. Both of those guys, you know, it's not all I ask for, but it's something I really love. It's when I get lost and I forget that that's Woody Harrelson. I forget that that's Patrick Wilson. I've seen these guys 1,000 times in 1,000 things. I just saw Woody Harrelson in Zombieland 2. But here he is, Chester Nimitz, and I am forgetting about everything I've ever seen him in. He's just Chester Nimitz, and that's what I really want to see. Every beat of this movie, I was just with him, like, pop, and where are we going next? And, you know, I know a lot of the history. I have an interest personally in history. I love it, especially American history, and I want to learn more about it. And just to learn and pick up a few things that I didn't know about, and, you know, little secret things, not secret, but, you know, things that aren't really studied that much. And to take that and then move forward and say, oh, yeah, I know about that, and they're about to do that. But being able to see it, and especially when it comes to the final battle, the battle for Midway. And, you know, you hear, you know, I've read reports, I've written my own reports, I've read books, but it's something different about seeing this trap get formed around the island of Midway and what they did to do that. And then there is something epic about riding the wing of a dive bomber down and hearing the sirens that they had on the landing gear just whine, which is something that they did to, like, put a little more extra fear in people that were down on the ships. There's something that I call the Olympic complex, and Corey, the other half of the Anthem podcast, always likes to talk about, you know, Ultimate Beastmaster and American Gladiators and the Olympics and, like, how he could totally compete with them. And I am a huge fan of having one average guy from the host country compete in every single Olympic event, just to show all of those average guys at home what it would be like if they were actually out there. Like, yeah, those guys seem like they're swimming at a decent clip. But look at that guy back there. The guy who just barely got off the blocks, that's you. Not those guys, that guy, that's you. Very similar to the zombie apocalypse movies where, you know, everyone imagines themselves as the survivors who are, like, killing zombies, but the reality is most of you, not me, clearly, I mean, I would be one of the survivors, but most of you would be zombies coming after me. Corey is one of those guys. He fully believes that he could compete at all of those, you know, hard events. And, you know, I'm not necessarily that guy. I recognize my faults, but, you know, I wanted to be an astronaut. We talked about that back at the Astro Review, but that required being a pilot, and I couldn't be a pilot because I don't have perfect vision. I don't have really good vision, in fact. Contacts, thankfully, make me not blind in my day-to-day. I'd like to think that I could pilot a plane, given the opportunity, given some training. The idea of being at 12,000 feet, breathing in just a bad mix of oxygen, turning that plane over, and just going into a 90-degree dive down on a ship, where the entire airframe feels like it's falling apart. Just shake, and flak bullets are being shot up at you and just exploding outside of your airplane, and little bits of the wing and the tail are being taken off, and you're hoping all you want in this world is to not take one dead center, because as long as you don't take one dead center, you're going to drop this 500-pound bomb right in the middle of that ship, and you make that whole big drop in, and then you release, and the launcher drops it off, and the ship is only, you know, 100 feet wide, maybe. From the air, you look like you're dead center, but you drop it, you pull up, and it just sploosh, sploosh, sploosh all around it. So insane. So insane, so intense. And I like to think I could do it, but I probably couldn't. And, you know, compare that to the torpedo bombers who, like, skim in off the water. Literally, like, people on boats are just turning and shooting at the sides of their plane, and they're dropping these torpedoes in the water. Not torpedoes like we have today, where it's like, hey, point and click, and this is what I want you to follow, and then you launch it, and it goes off and does its thing without you. This is like, all right, that is traveling at 12 knots. The torpedo travels at 6 knots. It's got to cover, you know, 4,000 meters. I need to fire it this direction so that as the ship catches up to it, it hits it. Just, if World War II was to happen now, there is a 100% certainty we would lose it. I don't know that there is anyone aged 17 to 23. We certainly don't have the numbers of people aged 17 to 23 to go out and fight a war right. Realistically, go out and fight a war like that, where it's like, it's not about smart bombs, it's not about, you know, special forces. It's just boots on the ground. It's pilots in planes made by General Motors. It's drivers in tanks made by Ford, and they just have to push through. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. There is a theory, of course, that countries only go to war because the leaders of those countries realize that they have the money, the means and the manpower to go to war. And I think any American president who looks around would say, well, one, we don't have the money, and two, we don't have the manpower. We might have the means, but we don't have the guys to drive the tanks, and we don't have the money to put gas in them. So maybe that'll keep us out of war. Midway, as far as I can say, historically reaccurate telling and beautifully shot, fantastically done. The one fault: I don't find Ed Skrein to be a fantastic actor. I've apparently seen him in other things, and I think that he's done reasonably well there. But he felt very wooden in this, and he felt like an actor portraying a role. And for him to be the center of the whole story, I just didn't believe him. You compare that to Woody Harrelson as Chester Nimitz, where I got lost and forgot who I was watching. Patrick Wilson as, Edwin Layton. And I compared those two to Ed Skrein as Dick Best, and I'm just like, you fall short. I needed you up higher. I just saw Knives Out, which was a star-studded cast, and everybody held their weight. And I feel like the problem with this was that Ed Skrein didn't pull his weight. I say that with a caveat. He may be doing an accurate representation of Dick Best. Dick Best is not a guy who I have heard of before. I don't know that he's that famous. I think it's just he wrote a book, and therefore this is the book that is leading to the movie, and that's the story we're telling. Maybe he did an accurate representation of Dick Best, and he nailed it. Just for me, it took me out of it. I was more happy when I saw literally anyone else on screen other than Dick Best, despite the fact that he was the protagonist and he was how we were moving through the story. And that makes me sad. Yeah, overall still, the movie is fantastic, and its weakness is still better than a lot of other movies that I've seen. But I wish it was better. I wish that one thing was better. And I mean, one of my friends asked me, who would you have had in that role? I don't know. I don't know who could play that role. I might have gone with Luke in that role instead. I think he could have really pulled that off and then had someone else play his role, Charles Dickinson. But anyway, as you can tell, I'm getting so excited about it and a little worked up. I loved Midway. Going back to kind of the test that we started at the beginning, listen, if you do not like war movies, this is not a movie for you. If you don't like action movies, not a movie for you. If you don't like a little bit of gore, I don't think the gore was over the top, but it was more realistic. So if you don't like that, not the movie for you. But if you're okay with all of those things, and if you love World War II, if you love the Pacific, if you love the planes and the ships, especially aircraft carriers, and you like to see the life of a soldier, of a sailor, you're gonna love this movie. I saw it a while ago. I'm pretty sure it's still in theaters. I'm pretty sure I just saw it on the marquee this weekend. So, it's still out there to go see, and, it's already a success, but don't go to support the movie. I mean, yes, you should support the movie. Obviously, you support the director and the cast and everybody who made this movie, but don't go to support this movie. Go because you can get some insight into a moment in American history that literally could have changed everything. The difference between the world we know now and the world that might have been was what happened at Midway, and Roland Emmerich and the cast and the crew did such a superb job showing us what happened that day and why we have the world that we have today. So, thumbs up, go see Midway. It's 100% worth the time to go check out. Well, there you have it. Yet another episode of the Everyman Movie Reviews in the books. At the top here, I want to thank my patrons. I would not be able to do this without you guys. I just went over to B&H and I got some brand new equipment, and that is all thanks to the support that I get from you. So thank you guys so very much. I can't say it enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And hey, do you want to be one of my patrons? Do you want to support all of the new projects that I have going on? It is super easy. Go on over to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Robert N. Cheek. You can donate at any level, even as little as $1 a month. That gets you access, and you'll be able to catch up to everything that I am working on. They get early access to all the videos. They get access to the books. They get thank yous in the books, thank yous in the videos. Everything that I produce, I make sure and get it to them early, and I make sure to thank them during the process. So go on over to patreon.com, patreon.com/Robert N. Cheek, and become one of my supporters. Let me know that you have a vested interest in the things that I'm working on. And of course, you can find me for free on all your social networks at Robert N. Cheek. That's going to be on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, Snapchat, over on TikTok, where I got some new videos coming. My new favorite thing is to make memes with my nephew. You are not going to want to miss that. So at Robert N. Cheek on all your social networks. And of course, make sure you're checking out robertncheek.com. That's where you're always going to find the latest updates to what's going on, what projects I'm working on, and what I have cooking that maybe nobody else knows about. You can sign up for the email list there, and of course, directions to Patreon, directions to Oh the Anthem, directions to everything that I have going on. That'll all be located right there. Finally, you're probably watching this video on YouTube at youtube.com/RobCheek, but don't forget it's also available in podcast form over at anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews. Now, at that link, you'll be able to find any of your sources of podcasts, where it's on Apple or Google or Pocket Cast or Dogcatcher, Stitcher, everywhere. Just go to anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews and you'll be able to find your link so you can have it on your podcatcher of choice. And of course, the shows are very similar, but there are a few very key differences. So if you do want to check out the podcast, make sure you go to anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews. You can throw another slash in front, put message. It'll let you leave a voicemail for me, and with your permission, I'll actually use those on the show. You'll also hear some promos that they don't hear here on YouTube, but people on YouTube, you guys will get some stuff that they don't get on Anchor. So maybe check out both, huh? How about that? But however you consume your content, I've got it for you. Podcast, video, you'll be able to find it. So thank you guys once again for joining me. Look for the next episode coming very soon. New episodes every Thursday, on the dot, no matter what. And another episode sometime in the week in between. Of course, I'm also working on the next episode of Rob Explains Everything. I'm thinking the Mandela Effect. So if you don't know what that is, make sure you go over to YouTube and subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you know when I update with my latest episode. A lot of stuff going on for me, a lot of stuff going on for you. So I appreciate you taking the time to check out this episode of the Everyman Movie Reviews. So until next time, thank you guys for joining me and have a great week, everybody.